This is a spiritual conversation between Akka Mahadevi and her disciple Chidananda. In the 12th century, in the sacred land of Karnataka, lived a saint whose devotion was as fierce as fire, Akka Mahadevi. She was a mystic, a poet, and an enlightened soul who renounced worldly ties in search of Lord Channamallikarjuna, Shiva. Her words were drenched in divine love, and her wisdom was beyond the grasp of mere intellect. Among her followers was Chidananda, a young scholar well-versed in scriptures, logic, and philosophy. However, despite his deep knowledge, his heart remained untouched by direct experience of the divine. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Chidananda approached Akka Mahadevi with a question that had been troubling him for a long time. Chidananda bowed and said, "Akka, I have studied all the scriptures, the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Shaiva texts. They explain the nature of Brahman, the means to liberation, and the logic behind devotion. Yet, I do not feel the presence of God as you describe in your poems. Why is that? Can logic not reveal Him?" Akka Mahadevi smiled gently, her radiant eyes glowing with divine ecstasy. "Ah, Chidananda, you are trying to measure the ocean with a small cup. Come, let me show you something." She gestured for him to follow her. Akka Mahadevi and Chidananda walked to a riverbank where the waters flowed steadily under the moonlight. She picked up a small clay doll and handed it to him. "Throw this into the river," she said. Confused but obedient, Chidananda tossed the doll into the water. Within moments, it began to dissolve, turning into mud and merging with the river. "What do you see?" Akka asked. Chidananda replied, "The doll is gone, Akka. It has become one with the river." Akka nodded. "That is devotion, my child. When you truly surrender to God, you do not remain separate. You dissolve into the infinite. But tell me, could you have understood this by just reading about water?" Chidananda thought for a moment. "No, Akka. I had to see it happen to understand it." Akka smiled. "Exactly. Just as the doll must be thrown into the river to dissolve, the mind must be thrown into love, into devotion, into surrender. Logic can describe water, but only immersion can make you one with it." Still lost in thought, Chidananda asked, "But Akka, isn't logic needed to guide us? The mind seeks understanding." Akka Mahadevi picked up a small piece of jaggery from her cloth bag and held it before him. "Tell me, Chidananda, if I explain to you in great detail how sweet this jaggery is, its texture, its taste, its composition, will you truly know its sweetness?" Chidananda shook his head. "No, Akka. I must taste it to know." She placed the jaggery in his hand. "Then eat." As he took a bite, the rich sweetness filled his mouth. "Now tell me, Chidananda, did logic bring you this experience?" He lowered his gaze. "No, Akka. I had to taste it." Akka's voice softened. "So it is with God. You can read, argue, and analyze, but unless you taste the divine through devotion and surrender, He will remain a mere concept to you." Still, one last doubt remained in Chidananda's heart. "But Akka, how do I taste God? How do I experience Him?" Akka Mahadevi pointed to a clay pot with a small hole in it. Inside, there was a burning lamp, but only a faint glow escaped through the hole. "Chidananda, this pot is your logical mind. Inside, the light of divine experience is already present. But because the pot is solid, you only see a small glimpse through the cracks. The more you break the pot, the more you let go of rigid thinking, pride, and intellectual arrogance, the brighter the light will shine. She then smashed the pot onto the ground, and suddenly, the flame stood exposed, shining in full glory. When the mind dissolves, the truth is revealed in its full splendor. That is why logic will always fall short. It builds walls, while devotion breaks them down. A deep silence settled between them. Chidananda felt something shift within him. His mind, so full of questions and debates, now felt empty yet full, as if he had unknowingly touched something vast and eternal. He bowed before Akka Mahadevi and said, "Akka, I understand now. God cannot be argued into existence. He must be felt, loved, surrendered to." Akka placed her hand on his head. "Yes, my child. Drop the heavy burden of logic, and you will see that He was always here." That night, for the first time in his life, Chidananda did not seek God in scriptures or arguments. He sat in deep stillness, his heart open, and felt the silent presence that had always been there. Moral of the story: logic can describe God, but it cannot reveal Him. Only experience can. Just as tasting jaggery is the only way to know its sweetness, devotion is the only way to know God. The mind acts as a wall, surrender breaks it down, allowing divine light to shine fully. To truly know God, one must move beyond thought and into direct experience. The mind argues, but the heart knows. Seek not to understand God, seek to dissolve in Him. Om Namah Shivaya.